Good morning, boys and girls. We are so close to the end of our book. We have 2 chapters left. So today we're going to read chapter 19 of The Secret of the Old Clock. This chapter is called Startling Revelations. Dad, it's nearly 2 o'clock now. Mr. Crowley's relatives should be here in a few minutes. I'm so excited. Carson Drew, who stood in the living room of the Drew home with Mr. Warren from the bank, smiled at his daughter as she fluttered about arranging chairs. I believe you're more thrilled than if you were inheriting the fortune yourself, he remarked. I am thrilled, Nancy admitted. Excuse me. I can scarcely wait until the will is read aloud. Won't everyone be surprised, especially the Tompums? Do you think they'll come? Oh yes, the Tompums will be here, and unless I am mistaken, they will bring a lawyer with them. Just as soon as they learned about another will coming to light, they began to worry. They will certainly want to hear what is in this one. Are you certain the will we found can't be broken? Nancy inquired anxiously. Of course I can't be certain, Nancy, but I have gone over it carefully, and as far as I can tell, it is technically perfect. I also asked a couple of lawyer friends, and they agree. Josiah Crowley was peculiar in some ways, but he was a very smart man. I promise you the Tompums will have a difficult time if they try to contest this will. The bank will help you fight, Mr. Warren put in. With the exception of Abby Rowan, who was still confined to bed, all of the old gentleman's relatives had promised to be present. Grace and Allison Hoover, although not relatives, had also been invited. It's too bad Mrs. Rowan can't come, said Nancy, but I'll take the news to her this very afternoon. The size of the fortune will probably be a great surprise to everyone but the Tompums, said her father with a smile. Nancy, you did a remarkable piece of detective work. It was fun, she said modestly, and I can hardly wait to have it all cleared up. We may have some trying minutes with the Tompums, Nancy, her father warned. Yes, I suppose. I expect that anybody would be sorry to see a fortune slip away. Dad, I see Grace and Allison coming up the walk now, Nancy announced, glancing out the window. She greeted them with kisses and escorted the sisters into the living room, where she introduced them to Mr. Warren. As Allison sat down, she whispered to Nancy, Is it true that a later will has been found? You and Grace have no cause to worry, Nancy assured her with a mysterious smile. The doorbell rang. This time, Nancy admitted Edna and Mary Turner, who were dressed as if it were for a party. With them was little Judy, who threw herself into Nancy's arms. A few minutes later, the Matthews brothers, William and Fred, arrived. I guess everyone is here except the Tompums, Mr. Drew commented. We had better wait for them for a few minutes. There was no need to wait, for at that moment the bell rang sharply. Nancy opened the door and found the 4 members of the Tompum family, who walked in hotly, merely nodding to the others in the room. As Mr. Drew had predicted, they were accompanied by a lawyer. Why have we been called here? Mrs. Tompum demanded, addressing Mr. Drew. Have you the audacity to claim that another will has been found? I have a will written only this past March, Mrs. Tompum, Carson Drew replied evenly, and I'd like to introduce you all to Mr. John Warren, trust officer of the Merchants Trust Company of Masonville, which has been named as executor. It's preposterous, Mrs. Tompum stormed. Josiah Crowley made only one will, in that he left everything to us with my husband as executor. It looks like a conspiracy to me, Ada added tartly as she gazed coldly upon the relatives and friends who were seated about the room. Isabel did not speak, but tossed her head contemptuously. Richard Tompum likewise did not offer a comment, but uneasily settled himself beside his own attorney. If you will please be seated, Mrs. Tompum, I will read the will, Mr. Drew suggested. Reluctantly, Mr. Tompum sat down. As I have said, Mr. Drew began, a recent will of the late Josiah Crowley was found in a safe deposit box in the Masonville Bank. The will is unusually long, and with your permission, I will read from a typed copy only the portions which have to do with the disposal of the property. But first, I want to ask Mr. Tompum what value he puts on the estate. 100,000 after taxes, the man replied. Oh, the Turners exclaimed. And Mary said, I had no idea Josiah had that much money. Nor I, Edna agreed. Mr. Drew picked up several typewritten sheets from the table and began to read in a clear voice. I, Josiah Crowley, do make this my last will and testament. hereby revoking all former wills by me at any time made. I give and bequeath all my property, real and personal, as follows. To my beloved friends and neighbors, Grace and Allison Hoover, a sum equal to 20% of my estate, share and share alike. I must be dreaming, Grace gasped. You mean I'm going to get $10,000? Allison cried out. She burst into tears. Oh, Nancy, you did this for me. Now I can have my voice lessons. Isabel Tompum eyed her disdainfully. It would take more than $10,000 to make a singer out of you, she said maliciously. Quiet, commanded her father. Let's hear what else this will says. His daughter subsided, but his wife exclaimed spitefully, The will is a fraud. The Hoovers aren't even relatives. It is no fraud, Mr. Drew told her quietly. Again, he picked up the will and began to read. To Abby Rowan, my late wife's cousin, in consideration of her kindness to me, a sum equal to 10% of my estate. Oh, I'm so glad, Grace murmured. Now she'll be able to get the medical and other attention she needs. And have someone live at her house to take care of her, said Nancy. That old lady gets $10,000, Ada Tompum said harshly. What did she ever do for Cousin Josiah? Angrily, she turned up to her mother. We took care of him for years. She didn't. I'll say not, Isabel echoed, her voice tart. To my cousins, Fred and William Matthews, a sum equal of 20% of my estate, share and share alike, Mr. Drew read. We didn't expect that much, Fred Matthews declared in genuine surprise. Josiah was very kind, Fred smiled. Now we can take a trip like we always wanted to, William. That's right, I just can't believe it. A long trip on an ocean liner or a plane. To my cousins, Edna and Mary Turner, 20% of my estate, share and share alike. Oh, how generous, Edna murmured. Now little Judy can have the things we've always wanted to give her. Yes, said Mary Turner. Oh, I feel so relieved. Aren't we mentioned at all? Mrs. Tompum broke in sharply. Mr. Drew smiled. Yes, you are mentioned. I'm coming to that now. To Richard Tompum, $5,000. To Grace and Allison Hoover. Hold on, cried Mrs. Tompum. What about me and the girls? No money was left to you, the lawyer stated simply. Isabel gave a shriek. Oh no, oh no, oh mother, all those bills. What will we do? Ada, too, had cried out. I'll have to go to work. Oh, I can't bear the thought of it. When the furrier died down, Mr. Drew read on. To Grace and Allison Hoover, my household furniture, now in the possession of Mrs. Richard Tompum. There was a gasp of surprise from everyone in the room, and Mrs. Tompum half arose from her chair. It was generally known in River Heights that she had practically confiscated Josiah Crowley's furniture at the time he had been induced to make his home in the Tompums. How insulting, the woman cried. Josiah Crowley dare hint that I took his furniture? I'm sure I don't know what was in his mind at the time that he wrote the will, Mr. Drew told her with a smile. Grace Hoover interposed quickly. We have enough furniture without Josiah Crowley's. Allison nodded. We'll not take any of it from you, Mrs. Tompum. Mr. Drew carefully folded the document he had been reading, and after placing it in his pocket, he said to the people in the room, That is all, except that there is a proviso for the executor to pay Mr. Crowley's just debts, including his funeral expenses, and that what the balance left in his estate goes to the Manningham Old Men's Home. I understand Josiah Crowley kept his estates in a liquid state. It will not be difficult to convert the estate into cash. For that reason, I should think that it would be possible to draw on your own inheritance at once. Ada wheeled upon Nancy, her face convulsed with anger. You engineered this whole thing, Nancy Drew, she accused bitterly. And any good I've done, I'm happy about it, Nancy answered. We'll break the will, Mrs. Tompum announced firmly. And tomorrow we'll read their last chapter.